Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Gavin, it is a pleasure to have you on the show. Would you mind introducing yourself to everyone out there listening?
Yes, my name's Gavan McMahon. Thanks, Robbie, for having me on the show. I'm in Brisbane, Australia. For those that don't know where Brisbane is, we're on the east coast, a little bit north of Sydney, a little bit south of Cairns. And in 2032, you'll know all about us because it's the Summer Olympics to be held in our sweet little city. My background, I'm retired now, but I was in law enforcement in Australia, in the Customs and Border Protection area. So went through all the junior ranks and then got up through to the management areas. Was in charge at Brisbane Airport here, passenger processing, movement of aircraft people in and out of the border. Worked a lot in the operational areas in waterfront. So I'd be an operation commander nationally, appointed with an operation commander from the Australian Federal Police, and we'd be mounting operations to intercept, yachts coming from South America full of cocaine. So that's my sort of background. Had a lot to do with surveillance and intelligence, running operations against the baddies, informant handlers. You've got to use a lot of intelligence when you're dealing with operational matters, so they go hand in hand. And that's when I sort of started getting into the JFK thing. I've always had an interest in it, and it was probably around 2017. I got a chance to head over to Dallas and went to a couple of conferences, which were good. And sort of some odd experience with some of that. But I got to meet a couple of gentlemen over there, well, several people, but two that I ended up spending a fair bit of time with over the years, and that's Bill Pulte, Professor Pulte from SMU College, University, and Michael Brownlow, African-American guy, did a lot of research way back. And they sort of pricked my interest because they were looking very closely at the Tippit thing. And why it interests me was they had very good contacts with the police. Now, if you're going to find out how some of this stuff went down, that's people you need to hear a little bit from. Some are probably willing to talk more than others. And Michael Brownlow, for example, goes back to Bobby Hargis, who's since died quite a few years ago now. But he knew Bobby Hargis for 30-something years. They were very close. Mike Brownlow was living at his house basically for years. Brownlow was a bounty hunter, so he was sort of on the fringe of sort of some criminal stuff as well. I think there's been a lot of disinformation about Mike's background, but we won't go into that. A lot of it's rubbish. And then you got chalk and cheese, Brownlow's character, and then you've got Professor Pulte, the complete opposites. Professor was emeritus professor at SMU, intercultural languages and things like that. Very clever man, very quiet, very analytical. And between the two of them, they talk to a lot of people. If you get a chance, I don't know if you have seen them, but there's two really good interviews, part one and part two, that the two of them do. Brownlow does most of the talking about the Tippit scene, and they're worth looking at. And some of what they come up with, I've since independently found some corroboration. So that's a bit about my background and how I sort of got involved looking at this sort of material, and how I sort of ended up focusing a little bit more on the Tippit side of things.
Now, when we talk about what Oswald did on that day, do you believe he took shots at Kennedy, and do you believe that he was responsible for the Tippit murder?
It was a high-level conspiracy, multifaceted organisations involved, very professional Dealey Plaza that went down. So well went down that we're still to this day trying to work out exactly how. We know there were multiple shooters. We know there were shots from the front. We know there were shots from the rear. I don't think Oswald. I'm pretty positive Oswald was not a shooter. What his position was he being used? Well, he called himself a patsy. I think there's a reason why he said that. As far as the Tippit thing, my research and looking at material that's been put together by a lot of authors, a lot of researchers, some very good stuff's gone over the years. A lot of it not in books, some of it just in journals and articles as they corresponding through the 80s and 90s, the way they did it. But also, I think Joseph McBride's book, Into the Nightmare, is pretty good. There's some really good material. I don't think Joseph goes enough on some of his analysis and says, well, this is pretty likely this is happening. There's one character that he does mention, but I think more emphasis needs to be looked at, and that's Harry Olsen. It's the one Jack Ruby happens to mention in his testimony. That's how Harry Olsen and Kathy Kay end up giving their testimony. So I think when it came to the Tippit situation, what I've come to the conclusion is that we had a planned interception by the Dallas police working with Jack Ruby and some other elements for the interception of Oswald. I think Oswald was guided to get to 10th Street. We can get into a little bit of some of the things that I've found through talking with the Helen Markham's family, and also talking to William Scoggins' family. And the crux of that is that the families have confirmed that both Helen Markham and William Scoggins were planted by witnesses. So I think that what's happened is that interception that occurred was to be the interception of Oswald, and I think that was to be Oswald being killed, and it backfired. And I think Oswald did shoot Tippit. I think not just the material I've got, but what other people have concluded. But you've also got a lot of witnesses there that do place Oswald there. So I think that some people have sort of said you're either going to have to ignore all of them or say they've all got it wrong. Some had a better look, I think, than others, but it's pretty strong kind of evidence. So, people talk about what would have happened if it went to trial. Well, all of them are going to have to get, discredited to wipe their testimony. Otherwise, you've got them all, quite a few of them, not all, but a few going to the lineups, picking him out. They're going to say the same thing when they get to the court. So whether those lineups survive, if we're talking about 60s in Dallas, I think you can make anything happen through those courts. So it doesn't, to me, it doesn't really make sense to say he would have been found guilty or not. I think that's a difficult thing to try and say, but I think they have the ability to influence juries, influence judges, influence the evidence. And I think that a lot of the evidence, even with the not just the Dealey Plaza side of things, but the Tippit thing, I think has been interfered with significantly.
Before we get into Helen Markham and some of the interview and what the family had told you, I'd like to ask you some certain things about, were you aware of the Tippit murder before you came across the other people that were researching into it? And that's when you kind of started doing your research. I mean, a lot of people still don't know that Oswald was being accused for killing a cop. That's what he's being charged with. He wasn't being charged with killing JFK. So I'm curious if you were aware that a cop was kind of the main charge. It wasn't the JFK thing. And then also, what do you think Tippit was doing in Oak Cliff in the first place? It was the interception part, but I mean, orders, contacts, information, that gives you some background to that.
Yeah. As far as Tippit being, sorry, what was the first part of your question? Sorry, Robert.
The first part of the question was about Oswald and the whole Tippit scenario. Like, did you know about a cop being killed?
Okay, yeah. When I look back, I was aware of it, and yes, I knew that he'd been accused of murdering the policeman. But it was sort of interesting. A lot of the books didn't mention much about it, and that's, to me, it was kind of, I couldn't understand why, but I didn't quite put two and two together as to why. And it was, I think, only after the visit that I really started to think, whoa, there's a lot more into this that just people have chosen not to go into. And I think if you're in Dallas at the time, given, I think, the police involvement, there's no wonder they didn't go near it, because I think it would have been dangerous territory. Some people did. I think some people went in there and come up with some disinformation. But as far as Tippit and why I think this thing went down, what he was doing there, he was outside of his district. I've talked to a couple of people that have done quite a bit of research around the allocation of the locations, like the zones that the police are looking after as far as their territory. Yes, they move around a little bit, but if you go back and look at it, Tippit's one of the very few, with Officer Nelson, that's called out by Murray Jackson, a former workmate of his, the radio operator, to head over to, 15 minutes after the JFK assassination, to head over to Oak Cliff outside of his area. Now, yes, they were moving a few people around, but he got the sort of attention that doesn't compute and no one else got. And then you got that very strange call at 12:54, be on the alert for an emergency at hand or something along those lines. No one else got that sort of message. And some people have tried to explain that. You really can't. That's something very odd. Whether that's been put in after the event, some of the radio logs, I'm quite convinced the radio logs have been interfered with. Um, the calls that you'll see happening, and I've got a couple of these if you want to have a look at them. But there's two calls in particular. At 1:03, Murray Jackson calls Tippit, doesn't get a response, and Murray Jackson says as much in an interview he did with Eddie Barker in 1967. At 1:08, there's two calls from Tippit back to the dispatch to Murray Jackson, and they're not answered. Now, when you look at the Warren Commission radio logs, there's three lots submitted to the Warren Commission. The second lot, not the Sawyer report, which was first, but the second lot, which was W Commission Exhibit 705, I think it is. You can clearly see in there Tippit call sign 78, and it's there twice. And then the actual time, 1:08, is right next to it. By the time you get to the FBI version in August that same year, 64, those two numbers have disappeared. And I think you got a 58 and a 488. And when you try and work out, they actually say unknown. We don't know who the officers were at 58 and 488. Yet if you go and delve into that, and this is what you've got to do with some of these things, because you have to kind of realize that sometimes a false conclusion, once arrived at, widely accepted, is hard to dislodge. And that's what I think happens with some of this information. So some people have just worked on, and I've seen it time and time again, those radio calls at 1:08 didn't occur. Well, there's pretty good evidence that they did occur, because Jim Bowles, who was the head of that radio group, the sergeant, he went on to be, I think he might have been an assistant deputy sheriff. But anyway, he at the time had pulled a lot of this material together. He actually states he doesn't know who put that FBI stuff together from Dallas Police, because it wasn't him, and he was the man. And he said, I know that was Tippit's voice, because he said, I heard it. And he said, I could actually differentiate the tone and the voice tenure, that you could actually hear Tippit's voice saying the four syllables 78. Now, that's pretty strong. But what's even stronger is, of all the people that corroborates that, is Vincent Bugliosi, who, of course, is not really into much conspiracy when it comes to JFK. He is on the RFK, but not on the JFK. And he says in his book, 4 Days in November, I was talking to Bowles over the phone. He got his recording of this tape and played it over the telephone for me. And Bugliosi says, I could hear the second call 78. I rest my case, Your Honour. I mean, that's pretty strong when you've got someone like Bugliosi who's not going to say that it's not correct. And he couldn't quite hear the first one, but then Bowles came and said, I can guarantee you this isn't the best quality one. My original back at my house, or wherever, has got it, and you can quite clearly hear 78 both times. So those transmissions from Tippit have been removed. I think, and this is where I do get into a little bit of speculation, is that I think Tippit's calling up about the interception that's going to occur, because I think a lot of people do accept or do find that the shooting occurred before the Warren Commission time of 1:15, 1:16. I think it's around that 1, 8, 9, 10, 11, somewhere in there. I don't think it's too much earlier. But that's where I think there's a lot of evidence that Tippit then was there on a planned interception. If you want to, I can touch a couple of little things about what the Markham family sort of revealed, what Helen Markham said, if you want, at this stage.
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to ask one small thing, but the prior information on Oswald, I mean, they have a person that I'm guessing is probably most of the police are aware of, just about this local person that's either has communist views or Marxist views. It's not necessarily a big city. Dallas had a lot of corruption. And if you look at the Dallas police and you try and examine them having information on this communist person, well, let's just say, the president's killed. You need somebody that needs to be blamed for the crime. Next thing you know exactly where this guy lives at or stays at. And then you just, go and grab them. And that's my opinion on it. I don't know if it's necessarily a whole giant grand governmental conspiracy. I think it's just Dallas police needed a culprit and needed a suspect, and then you have J.D. Tippit being sent down there.
Yeah. Well, I think as far as Oswald, I think as they sort of have said, plenty of times that the fingers of intelligence are all over him. And I think you've only got to look at some of the things he was deployed to do, their tasks, whether it's intelligence or FBI or whoever. In my paper that I did, it's in the Garrison Journal, November last year, about the information that I was able to reveal from the Markham family. It's sort of indicating there that he had possibly been tasked by somebody, FBI or whatever, into that Oak Cliff area, and that may have been part of how they were staging him. But I think when I got to the Markham family, the information I was able to glean, just a quick little bit of background. Helen Markham had 5 children. She was related to the Hamiltons that ran with Bonnie and Clyde. That's Floyd Hamilton, Ray Hamilton, because her maiden name is Hamilton. So we're pretty certain they were uncles. And it's kind of interesting because that name, Floyd Hamilton, then started to come out through the research I was doing. Now, Ray Hamilton was executed in prison for the murder of police back in the 30s. Floyd was on the FBI wanted list for quite a period of time, and he was captured and sent to prison for, I think, 28 years. And he was eventually paroled back to Dallas. And Sheriff Bill Decker, W.O. Bankstown, who was a big car dealer, Lincoln Continental, and some others sponsored that movement of him back into the town. And his role was security with the Lincoln company, the automobile company. But he had another job, and he was basically mentor to the gang that was running in Oak Cliff, and a fence for them, because he was looking after the stolen property that the gang was coming across. And that included vehicle, it included stuff from break and enters, cash, jewelry, all sorts of stuff. And that gang was led by Helen Markham's 4th child, James Markham, and another member of that gang was William Markham, her 5th child. And those boys were only 19 and 18. By the time they were around November, they'd only actually both of them been released from prison about August and September, those couple of months before the assassination, and they'd done time. There were other gang members that were around the Tippit scene at the time. William Smith, who people do talk about, that was on parole for Carthage. There's 2 others there that people aren't talking so much about. Jimmy Burt, well, they do talk about him, but they're not linking him so much to the game, which is the link you got to make. But there's another one, and William Smith and Jimmy Burt are on the corner of Denver and 10th. Across the road at that building site was another William Smith, William Red Smith. And that was William Markham's best mate. Him and the younger brother was also in the gang, William Red's younger brother. So there's a lot of this sort of stuff going on with the gang. And the information that I ended up getting through was that through William Markham, so that's Helen's youngest son, was married to Laverne, and Laverne's still around. And I spoke with Laverne over quite a long period of time, and some other members of the family as well, but principally Laverne. And she knew Helen Markham for more than 30 years. She was married to William for 48 years till he died a few years ago. And she was able to get a good understanding of exactly what had gone down. And she'd spoken to Helen about this. She'd spoken to her husband about this. So when you come back, I suppose, just looking at this big picture, and you mentioned it early on, when you talk about Oswald and you talk about what the plan was and what was Tippit doing there and all those sort of things, you've got to go back and ask yourself, when this all was planned, multifaceted organisations planning out the assassination of JFK. They had a clear priority. JFK had to be killed. They had a second important priority, which is cover up and media and all those controls and had to put in place. And the third was they're going to have to come to some sort of closure. Now, what's the closure? Is it a patsy? I think most people would say yes. They had to come up with some sort of closure. If you form the view that, yes, they were going to have a patsy, then you've got to ask yourself, what were they going to do? What was the plan? You have a mission, you have objectives, you have command and signal, you have all of these different tasks, allocation of resources, quite a complex plan. But you have to ask yourself, what was the plan with Patsy in the end? Were you going to arrest him? Were you going to let him escape, leave the country? Were you going to kill him? I don't know what your views are. My view is I don't think they planned to arrest him, because you're letting a person who may have some involvement here, if you're part of a plan to take him out, that might be able to talk, and you're going to leave him around and alive to spill the beans and start saying some stuff. He said a few things. I'm sure he said a lot more in those interviews that we don't know anything about, other than some cryptic notes and all those sort of strange goings on by the police. But I think you've got to come to the realisation, or I come to the realisation, that it's clearer to me when I looked at what I've found out from the Markhams and also the Scoggins family, is that there were a number of staged events that were put in place to, like a fly into the spider web. The web was tightening, and they brought Oswald into that area. They were able to control him to that point. They got him walking down 10th Street. Helen Markham has clearly said he wasn't walking to the east, he was walking to the west. So what she said in her Warren Commission testimony is not what the truth was, and she's confirmed he was coming from other directions. So what the family said, there's three principal events that were put in place around Oswald coming down 10th Street. The first was Helen Markham was a planted witness. She's confirmed this. The family's confirmed this. She was paid. We don't know precisely how much for that particular event. She was there to witness the arrest of Lee Oswald. And you go, okay, arrest for what? Now, William Markham and James Markham were doing break and enters. That's what they did. And Laverne was able to confirm, William told her point blank, yes, we took Oswald because he was connected to the gang in some way on break and enter of a house in the Oak Cliff area, stole jewellery and money. So they were setting him up. Now, that's coming direct from the family. That's pretty strong evidence that something is being made to happen around Oswald. There's a plan for him as a patsy, and it's contributing to this overall plan. You then have a third event that is staged at the corner of 10th and Marsalis. And this event was mentioned by Harry Livingston and some others back in the day in their books. I think it was Killing the Truth. No, it wasn't Killing the Truth. It was The Radical Right in Dallas. This stage event was basically some sort of a fight, which ended up being a stabbing at 10th and Marsalis. And these events that we're talking about had, reason for them. That event was to call the police to give them some justification in hindsight as to why they were there, to give some sort of rationale. They were called to the area because of this disturbance, this fight that occurred at 10th and Marsalis. In the meantime, Oswald's walking down the street. He doesn't know what's just been staged behind him. He's walking in the westerly direction, and all of a sudden he's going to come to a point where he's stopped. The mentioning of this fight, disturbance at 10th and Marsalis, was confirmed through the Markham family, but they're saying that this was all staged by Jack Ruby, Floyd Hamilton, and James Markham, and through law enforcement. So there was a little coming together. Exactly who's who and who spoke to who, don't know, but that's the group that was coalescing, put this all into place. The understanding, and the Markham family did not know anything about this particular part, but I know Brownlow and others have mentioned this, that they believe Oswald was walking towards Max Long's house, which was only about 3 or 4 houses further down in the direction he was walking. He would have crossed Patton on the south side of 10th, kept walking west before you get to the Abundant Church. And Max Long's got premises on that side of the road and also across the road. I think it's the Evelyn Apartments. And that came out in a document, FBI with Dallas police informants involved years later, but it seemed to carry some weight. But that in its essence is the sort of plan that was put around. So Helen Markham's a planted witness. We then have, we can get into this a little bit more, but just briefly, William Scoggins' family, Ken Scoggins, his grandson, it's confirmed that William Scoggins' youngest son, he had 2 sons, his youngest son, Calvin, he told him in, what are we talking? We're talking late 70s. He told him the story that William Scoggins told his son, I was a planted witness. I was recruited by a mob associate of Jack Ruby's, for Jack Ruby. So that's what William Scoggins was told, to be there, be in his car, and he was told he would know what to do. So that's 2 planted witnesses. And you go, whoa, it's getting pretty close to equal sign, equals conspiracy. You've then got a question mark, I think, around another couple here. Benavides is very strange, the goings on. You've only got to look at what I've written in that Garrison article about what Lavelle says and Benavides, and you've got some real problems with his attendance there, and whether he's also had a role. You've got the Davis sisters-in-laws on the corner house. Their telephone number for that place ended up in Jack Ruby's notebook, and that was talked about by Laverne Crayford when he was interviewed at the Warren Commission, saying, well, what's this number doing in there if it's an ad hoc kind of telephone number? It's what's that telephone number doing in there in Ruby's regular contacts book? And Ruby had rung, or that phone had rung Ruby. So there's some connection to the Davis sisters-in-laws. But the bigger one, and I think this is one that's been overlooked a little bit, is Bowley. Tom Bowley, T.F. Bowley, who is the one that ends up calling through on the radio. Now, if you believe Benavides, he's travelling in a westerly direction, coming from the east, coming from the scene of this incident, this disturbance up at 10th and Marsalis. And you've also got Bowley coming in the same direction, coming from that same scene, heading in a westerly direction behind Oswald. That's what it appears. You've only got to look at Temple Bowley's history. He only died a few years ago. I think he lived to about 96 or something. He very well connected with Jack Ruby. They go back through most of the 50s. He had a nightclub business himself that he was running. I think it was the Hideaway or something. And it went into financial troubles. Jack Ruby bailed him out. So he owes Jack Ruby. And it was just interesting when Joseph McBride, Into the Nightmare, had talked about Bowley. Bowley just never happened to mention to McBride the long association he had with Jack Ruby. The interesting thing for me, though, is also his background. He was a bouncer. He worked for Jack Ruby in the Star and a couple of other clubs that Jack Ruby had. And a bouncer's a tough gig. You're pretty streetwise. So you've got a number of characters around here, and I'm speculating when I get to Bowley, and I'm speculating with Benavides. But I think there's a big possibility that if you're planning this from the baddies' point of view, and from when I say the baddies, the Jack Rubies and people, but if you've got crooked cops in here, you've got a planned interception, a covert clandestine operation going down, you have got to have somebody on the ground to make sure things are in place. If you're going to set up a Scoggins and a Markham and others, if you've got 2, there's probably more. And who is that? I think Bowley fits that bill quite nicely. So that's sort of in a nutshell where I came to as far as what they saw. Is the next part of that question.
When it talks about planted witnesses and we talk about Helen Markham, do you believe it was to see the arrest of Lee Harvey Oswald, or do you believe he was supposed to die there? If you had a bunch of people saying Oswald took a shot or pulled his gun out and then Tippit fired upon or whoever fired upon and killed Oswald there, then that's it. You don't need an arrest. You don't need to worry about information leaking out because a lot of people suspect he was supposed to die at the theater. I think that too. I think Dallas police hired Jack Ruby to go finish off the thing and stop Oswald from going to testify or going any of this going to court. But when it comes to the Tippit murder, it's one of the most suspicious. It's the one that really doesn't make sense. And like especially with Oswald turning and look, I'm on this part, the three shots, firing two shots at Tippit and then one in the head. I mean, immediately when I heard that, I thought that was a gang thing. I mean, you can try and relate it to intelligence, but it immediately sounds like gang action to me. And if you're talking about Helen Markham being planted as a witness, I mean, I would more assume that they were going to witness a murder, which was going to not be the Tippit murder, but Oswald's death. So they can just be like, oh, this is what happened. Oswald fired upon Tippit and Tippit defended himself or whoever defended himself and they took him down.
Yeah, look, the last bit there where you said that, they're there to witness a murder. I think they're there to witness murder. I talked to the family, what was Helen's understanding, and they're saying, no, she didn't know there was going to be that shooting. To her words were that it was to be the arrest of Oswald. Now, whether that's the truth, don't know. That's what they're saying. Um, I think you put planted witnesses in a controlled environment, which is what that situation there is. We can get to a little bit about what they actually saw because there's some pretty interesting things that they saw, including a second police car, and we get onto that. But I think the planted witnesses there, you've got to compare that to the Texas Theatre and go, oh, what was the plan? What is the plan to Texas Theatre? Where's the plan to witnesses? Just go back to where you are. The plan of witnesses are here at 10th Street, and you've got a static environment. You've got a controlled environment where it's got public area where you can plant witnesses. If you go to the Texas Theatre, you've only got, I think, 3 staff on there that they postal, Burrows, and the projectionist, maybe one other. But if you haven't got them on side, then how else are you going to operate this thing? So that public area on the street is where you would do it. You've got control of the area. You've got
You had press there within a matter of like 20 minutes looking, like you had a bunch of stuff set up that seemed like kind of fake.
Yeah, and I think when you plan operations, the KISS principle does kick in. Keep it simple, stupid. And the more complicated you make it, the more moving parts. So if they're going to stage that thing there to have the constabulary then chase Oswald to the theatre and then get him there, my question is, well, how come he walked out of the theatre? That doesn't compute. If your original plan is you got a patsy, are you going to dispose of the patsy, kill the patsy, or are you going to arrest the patsy? Well, okay, well, if that's the original plan was to kill him, which I think it would have been, get rid of the patsy. You don't want the patsy talking. Then that's what I think 10th Street was about. And again, there's a book that came out. You may have seen it. It's that 1964 book, Thomas Buchanan, which who killed JFK, who killed Kennedy, and he was American guy. He left the country due, I think, to some of that sort of communist leaning and whatever. So he left with his family, went to France. He was working for the French newspaper over there and was sent back to cover the Ruby trial, which is how he, I think, got across this information. He was a captain in the army in World War II, so quite a upright kind of guy. And but he left the country. He comes back and he wrote this book. Now he wrote this book in May 1964. Just think about that. There's no Warren Commission material out there yet, and you're thinking, May, they've only just started. So he got talking to some people. It's quite clear. I'm in touch with his family, and we'll see where we can get to on that. But he wrote some very interesting things in the book, and some of it is certainly the first conspiracy book there is, and he certainly puts in his interpretation of what Tippit's role was. And he's even got a thing there saying that Tippit is to make it look like Oswald was resisting arrest and then confronted him and he had to shoot him in self-defense. That's basically what Thomas Buchanan's book is saying Tippit's role was. So he's also got in that same book a police overseer that's, thereabouts. Um, and I think that's pretty valid. You would have had backup. And as I said, we can get to talk about that second police car if you want as well. But I sort of think that it's to kill Oswald. I'm quite convinced that's the case. I don't think it. I'm pretty convinced that that's the case because it's the plan that makes sense. It achieves the original plan to kill JFK, get the conspiracy and cover up, and part of the cover up was the patsy, control the media, and you're in. Now, what you ended up with was this sort of charade going over to the theatre, and then you've got, and if you want to talk about some of the people there at the theatre, I'm quite happy to talk about some of those because I don't put credibility on Butch Burroughs stuff. You only got to look at his Warren Commission testimony. Julia Postal certainly doesn't rate him as far as his strength of character or whatever. When Oswald comes into the theatre, she gets Brewer to go and look for him. Butch, you go with Brewer. Like it's kind of a bit strange. There's the guy that works there, but she's not going to him. I don't think there's anything sinister in that. In fact, Ian Gregg's a UK copper that did a lot of work interviewing people. Interviewed Brewer and was quite satisfied the guy was genuine. I mean, just quickly on that, we won't spend a lot of time on the theatre stuff, but when you listen to Jack Davis and you listen to Butch Burroughs, if you go back and look at the original stuff that Burroughs said before, he's speaking to Jim Mars, and then he speaks to who's the other guy that wrote the book a couple of years later, James Douglas. But in that one, when he's talking with Mars, he actually says something like, apparently there was a lookalike arrested at the theatre and taken
In the
out the
balcony.
back. He says apparently. He says apparently. Yeah, by the time he gets to the next researcher, James Douglas, a few years later, he's saying he witnessed that. He didn't say that in the Jim Mars thing at all. He didn't witness it at all. By the time he gets there, the story is embellished. So I think you've got to be careful when these stories start changing. If you plant your flag on that's what's happened. Oswald's in the theatre before that. Burroughs is quite adamant that he sold popcorn to him at 1:15, but he's also quite adamant the movie had already started. Well, the movie didn't start at 1:20. It's then got an interlude of 20 minutes. So I've got the schedule, and the first several minutes is the war hero. What's his name? Eddie Murphy. Is that the guy's name? World War II hero, the actor. I've got the wrong name there. What's not Eddie Murphy? What's his name? He's an actor and he's a World War II hero. And he does the introduction of this movie, War as Hell. But if you listen to Jack Davis, who's the guy that's sitting up the back right-hand corner, he's quite adamant. He says, well, this guy comes up, Oswald. He moves across in front of the seat. Right, Davis had to get out of his seat to let this guy in, Oswald. He sits next to him, sits down, then gets up and then moves a couple of seats further down from him. Then gets up and goes around and does exactly the same thing on the guy on the other side of the aisle. Then he leaves. And then Davis is quite adamant. He says, I lost sight of him. And they asked several times, and he says, it's 3 or 4 minutes. The lights come on. That's a guy, he said, I then went out to find out why the lights are on. And while I'm out there, the cops come in the door. Then I'm watching the guy that just tried to sit next to me some minutes earlier getting taken out the front door. So that's Oswald then. So I don't know with the Butch Burroughs story. I'm quite comfortable that you've only got to listen to Davis. He's pretty confident. Now, when you look at what Jim Mars wrote with Butch Burroughs and all this sort of stuff, he talks about Davis saying it was 20 minutes later that the lights come on. Well, Davis doesn't say that at all. So I think there's some information in that early stuff that's inaccurate, whether that's intentional, whether that's a mistake, who knows? But I don't think that information's accurate, and I don't give it credibility.
Or some of these problems with witness testimony is the fact that like everyone's time perception's a little bit off. You say you're going to do something in 5 minutes, next thing you know, it's 30 minutes later. Yeah. But I would look at the testimony of Nick McDonald, which a lot of people tend to forget, but he was the arresting officer in the theater, the one that got punched in the face and allegedly stuck his webbing of his hand inside the finger or the trigger to stop the gun from the firing pin from clapping down. That's why the gun didn't go off. He wasn't supposed to be there. He heard it on the radio and he was ordered to stay in his position just for like I forgot where exactly, but he was riding with somebody. He just decided to go start going into places. He went into a library at one point, and then he ran out, and then he heard the call about the Texas Theater, and he drove immediately there. I don't think he was supposed to be there, and he's not in the Warren Commission volumes. He has, I mean, he sells his photo signed copy with the revolver on eBay for like $25 or something. But he was a local hero. He had one little small thing about him, and they took photos of his face with the giant cut. I don't know how he got that cut. I don't believe it was from the firing trigger backing up, and he said it was because when they fell into the seat, it had cut him. But I think that's why he wasn't killed in the theater, was because he wasn't supposed to be at the theater to do the arrest. I mean, if you look at that as being another point, if we take it away from the Tippit scene and you talk about it leading to the theater aspect, I mean, there's a lot of inconsistencies there. There's a lot of people that say that Oswald got up and sat next to random people, which would fit the theory that he was an intelligence operative holding up half a box top, which is on the inventory list when he was arrested. But then you also have, there is someone that was apprehended, in my opinion, in the balcony. And that's based on statements from one of the guys who tripped trying to jump the seats in an interview. He talked about, he's got his crutches in the background and everything. He literally, yeah, he literally states that he was trying to jump through the seats to apprehend this person in the balcony. That's why you have people that said he's up in the balcony, and you have other statements that say he was on the floor. I believe the lights didn't come up until later because then you have the scuffle with Nick McDonald. That lasted a lot longer than 4 minutes, and those lights were off the whole time. So that's again, like, I mean, there's inconsistencies there, but I'm starting to stick more with probably the Tippit would have been the killing scene for Oswald. But I think it's because he didn't die in the theater later was because of Nick McDonald. I don't think he was supposed to be there at all. And the fact that the Warren Commission didn't pick him, I mean, why did the Warren Commission pick any of their star witnesses? Because they could have leverage over any of these people. Look at Helen Markham. Her son's activities that the Dallas police were using against her. Well, I mean, if you're a star witness for the Warren Commission, could the Warren Commission or Dallas police not force you to give a testimony that would fit the Warren Commission's investigation with the same incriminating thing on your background?
Yeah, yeah. I think you raise an interesting point there when you talk about McDonald from the point of view of was he supposed to be there or not? I don't really know. Like I said, I've spent a fair bit of time looking at the radio stuff, and there's movement of communications that has occurred to change times. You've only got to look at, I think it's R.N. Walker. I'm not sure. It's definitely the surname's Walker. He's on the scene in less than 2 minutes from a different district, and he's hunting Jefferson for the suspect. And I'm going, I thought there's an officer being shot over, somewhere around the corner at 10th. You haven't even gone there. Like there's some. So I think that conversation's occurred, but it's occurred later on, and they brought it back closer to this time. But it doesn't make sense. I think there's a number of those sort of things in there. But I think the point you make is interesting with McDonald or people at the theatre. So what sort of a well-constructed plan at Dealey Plaza did they have with people who didn't know straight away what happened? They had, an effective escape that had occurred and a very successful, sophisticated little operation there. Yet the one over here at Oak Cliff didn't work because if you've got the Texas theatre scene now, not with just some bad cops doing some operation, which is what I believe Tippit and others were doing there. You've now got any bad cops now mixed with inverted commas good cops who are genuinely looking for someone who shot a policeman. That's all they know about it. They're just responding, and a lot of them did. Again, you look at those radio calls, that radio traffic is not what you'd expect to see with a policeman being shot for certain. This stuff's been removed from there. But again, if it's such a good plan at the Texas Theatre, it should have been, he's got a gun, bang, and the police have surrounded it, and then there's a gun, whether he had a gun with him or not, there's a gun, boom, and it's the one that he ordered to the post office box, not. So that didn't happen, and that's why I don't think that was a plan, because it was running by the seat of their pants, and it got out of control. He lived for 2 more days. Ruby got the job later on. There's an interesting thing there about Ruby. Like I said, he's key to coordinating this with the Markham people and organised crime, and also with the Scoggins people. Now, that guy I mentioned earlier, Thomas Buchanan, you've only got to look at, I think it's a 1975 London Times article where Ruby's psychiatrist, when he was in jail, Werner Tutor, I think his name was, German, said that Ruby told him, and it's in the article. This is the psychologist saying Ruby said that he was part of the plot, and he said if you want to understand the Kennedy assassination, read Thomas Buchanan's book, Who Killed Kennedy. Boom, boom. That's pretty good. That's pretty strong sort of hint. Ruby did this a few times. Like I said earlier, it was Ruby that mentioned the name Harry Olsen. It's interesting when you look at the Warren Commission testimony, they don't use the word Olsen. It's Corson. They use it, they misspell. They do that quite a lot. They deliberately or accidentally misspell the name, a key name, and sort of want to do some research on or whatever. And that's how the Harry Olsen thing all comes out. And I think he's one of the very suspicious people involved from the police perspective. Mike Brownlow and Pulte have clearly got Harry Olsen in the mix as coordinating, picking up Oswald from the rooming house while he's waiting on the street corner at the bus stop. Cop car's been around once, whatever, and taken to the tent and said, "Where you go down to Max Long's house." That's their story. The Markham people did not say anything about that at all, so I'm not mixing those two things in there. But I think, when you're hearing that sort of stuff with Ruby, that's the go-between that the police have to use to put the players in place so the police have got arm's length, distance from it. But yeah, that's where I see some of that.
Have you, with the JFK assassination, have you noticed just kind of not the polarity with it, but the fact that there's like two sides with Oswald? Obviously, the people that defend and say he wasn't involved in anything, and then people that say he was the only one. There's obviously this polarization that goes on, but if you're saying he didn't take a shot at Kennedy, but he killed Tippit, I'm curious what your viewpoint and interaction with other people in the community is on that. But also, do you believe there's any association with Jack Ruby? The reason why I state this, and it's a lot of speculation on my part, but there's statements from like Evelyn Harris and Lucy Lopez and all these people that Ruby gave Oswald a gun. I don't believe it. But if you really kind of examine, if you're going to say that the Tippit scene was going to be the murder of Oswald, arresting, and then him trying, you give him a gun, it doesn't work. Why did his gun not work in the theater? Because I don't buy a guy sticking his hand in the webbing of the thing and it didn't fire. I think that gun just didn't work. There was something wrong with the firing pin or something like that. And I think even the Warren Commission stated there was a problem with the firing pin. That's why it didn't go off. But if you really take it back to if Jack Ruby handed Oswald a gun and he was a part of this setup plot, you give him this gun, he gets stopped by an officer, he pulls his gun out, now you have a reason to shoot the guy, and he's dead on the scene. But then you get to the Texas theater, would explain why the gun didn't work. Again, speculation on my part, but I'm curious what your thoughts are just because your interaction with the JFK community, if you do interact with them. I mean, saying Oswald did anything, if you're on the conspiracy side, people tend to be a little bit aggressive.
Yeah, to me, I think he knew something about it. I think he's been, exactly what that was at the school book depository. Did he assist, open a back? I got no idea. Did he open a back door? Did he put something down in place there that he was told just place this on the 6th floor? I really don't know. It really comes down to if they're going to have him as a patsy, he doesn't need to have really had much of a role anyway. He's not a shooter. But if he's, had some minor role or he's just assisting, think he's assisting and they're giving him some bit job, but it's just he thinks he's involved and they've moved him along. If you look at Farewell America, a book that was written in 1968, Hepburn, I think the guy's name was, and it sort of puts forward that theory that Oswald being recruited out of New Orleans and the Clay Shore and all of this sort of stuff, that he may have been told, we've got a gig for you now. We want you to go up. There's going to be a false flag kind of attack, against Kennedy. It's just to scare him because of his communist leanings, He's given some task thinking that's what it is. I really don't know. It's an interesting theory, that one that they put out. There's some people that have talked about that book and said that they reckon some Kennedys had some input into that and were aware of some of the material, and that may not have been written purely by that guy whose name's on it. And it may be, some very good information in there. But as far as what then happens to Oswald, when you talk about the evidence and the guns and, let's talk about wallets, we talk about colours of jackets. We've got a white jacket and a grey jacket and a brown jacket and a dark jacket and a blue jacket. So all of these things get very confusing. Some of it's people just see different things. The ballistics, the Winchester shells, the Remington shells, all that sort of stuff. I think there's been interference with stuff for reasons that I think relate to at what point does the Oswald pistol revolver end up in the evidence? Was it in evidence taken off him in the theatre, or was that a different weapon? Is the story with McDonald or Bentley or whatever, with their putting their webbing through there? I don't know whether that's true or not. They came up with that pretty quickly, from what I've been able to sort of research when that started coming out. But I think when you look back to the scene, if you're going to have a patsy and you're going to intercept him in a planned operation with planted witnesses and have some backup police car in support, do you know if you're wanting to him be aggressive or whatever, do you know if he's got a gun? If the plan is to kill him and then say he pulled a gun on me, you're going to have to throw down a gun. Has he got his wallet in his back pocket? You have to bring one to the scene. You don't know whether he's going to have his wallet with him. You've got to. This is how things work. So, is it possible that the weapon's been substituted? Yeah.
This is the part where I recommend Bart Camp's work because when they first arrested him at the theater, he had nothing on his person besides like the revolver and stuff like that. But then on the second time, they patted him down and checked him. That's where you get the revolver bullets that were in his jacket pocket or his shirt pocket, and you get the flimsy bus pass. Which, look, a bus pass you can miss, but I don't see anybody missing extra bullets in somebody's, if you're actually doing a pat down correctly. So either one of the cops lied about patting him down, or they planted that evidence on him. And I think there's plenty of evidence to show you that the Dallas police back then, when we talk about corruption, all they cared about was their conviction rates. So when they got someone, they weren't going to be like, oh, it was accidental. He's not the guy who killed the president. No, they were really cared about making sure that they either saw somebody fry or they made sure they convicted this person. And I think that you get the manipulation of evidence when it comes to like the paper bag that was in the sixth floor building. They made it too short. It was made that day. So that bag that just mysteriously popped up as evidence of like, this is how it got in here. Was a 36 inches they made the bag. And the rifle would stick out 2 inches past what the bag was. So then anybody could tell there was a rifle in a bag. It wouldn't just be like carrying curtain rods. So there's a lot of things with like Dallas police, and it's even on tape of them like with he's trying to speak to a lawyer and something like that. Well, Fritz gets the one person that he already knows from the ACLU or whatever to come down there and represent him and at least give his take on something like that. That's not legal representation. He was asking for a real lawyer. So there's a lot of stuff where it's like obviously police really shenanigans to really back up. But I mean, when it comes to the overall Dallas police mindset back then and what you were able to learn and what also the gang activity was back then, that I feel like a lot of people just don't have context for. I mean, maybe you can give a little bit.
Yeah, I think Bart's done some really good work. He was actually trying to interview Bill Pulte. Unfortunately, Bill passed away, but we didn't quite get that one done because Bill had some interesting things he wanted to share. But Bill was very good in trying to understand how the Dallas police looked at things. So was Mike Brownlow. I mean, what Bart's identified there with Fritz and everything, I think, is really good. They didn't need to keep recordings or keep notes because they didn't need them to prosecute. They had a lot of guilty pleas. They had a lot of evidence that would just appear. I mean, you've only got to look at the way they handle evidence through any of this to say, well, there's a reason you don't take care with handling the evidence. It's very easy to mess it up around, just change it up because you haven't had a discipline around it. Disciplines get corroboration, all sorts of things, signatures, modern day stuff. But if you look back at, how that some of that material sort of appeared or disappeared, I think the classic's the wallet. That came out through the FBI through what was the agent Barrett, who states it, and it's in Hastie's book, and he says, well, Westbrook's standing there and flipping through this wallet and asking me, do I know Oswald and Hurdell? That's a pretty good indication. I think this is speculation now that the plotters, when things went awry and Oswald shot Tippit, they had to make a decision. There's no point putting the gun down Did they put the wallet down? I think they did. I think a decision was made to put it in. The reason I can say that, and we might get to that a little bit now, is that Helen Markham has said that there were two policemen in this other police car in support, and that police car left the scene, came back to the scene, and the younger of those two policemen introduced that wallet. That's according to the Markhams. That's come from Helen Markham. She's the one that was there. So if you want to, we can just touch a little bit on that, Robbie, because I think it just sort of goes to the issue on the plan that I think was put in place around what was supposed to happen at 10th Street. And it was supposed to be a dead person resisting arrest, Oswald, Patsy, and all this other stuff would come out about his communist leanings still. He's breaking and entering into houses. He was wanted on an arrest for housebreaker. Then there was this assault, this incident that occurred up at 10th Street, which they might have been linking him to, because Tippit, Murray Jackson's given Tippit a call on the radio to say there's been a disturbance up on 10th and Marsalis. And Murray Jackson actually did call him about a disturbance. People aren't, fully aware of all this stuff. If you listen to that Murray Jackson interview with Eddie Barker, 1967, he says something, Murray Jackson, the radio dispatcher, says, I called Tippit, and he said it was at Lancaster. And then I called him a time later to keep track of him on the line. And then I called him again and no answer, didn't get an answer. That call where he didn't get an answer is at 1 minute and 3 minutes past 1:03 call. So Tippit didn't answer. I think there's some transmissions that have occurred later on, which is why Tippit's calling at 1:08 twice. But I think they've probably removed Murray Jackson's messaging that might have gone on that said something like 87 or 78, whatever the number was. We've got a report of a disturbance. Murray Jackson in that interview says exactly that. He says the police got a call, the police alert sheet, which is written down by the typist on the phone, was handed to me, and I called Officer Tippit about this disturbance. I got no reply. You try and find that in the radio logs. That call doesn't exist. So there's, to me, quite clear erasure, tape alteration occurring. So there's Murray Jackson saying they got a call about a disturbance. Well, this is the disturbance that I'm telling you about, that the Markhams have confirmed that Ruby and the Markham people and James Markham and Floyd Hamilton were involved in setting up, which is the 10th of Marsalis. And Harry Livingston in his book, The Radical Right, had also identified this particular incident. Because people had said to Pulte, if you want to know about the Tippit, I don't call it Tippit murder, I call it Tippit shooting. You want to find out about the fight at 10th and Marsalis. So I sort of look at all that, and then I came to understand a little bit about what Helen Markham was saying she saw. She's saying she saw two men at the scene. One was Oswald, walking from the west. She said a second man, who's only young, came out from between the second and third house, where she also saw a parked police car with two officers. This second person, who I've dubbed the Italian man because that's about as much as we know of him, he's only young, seemed to be standing behind Oswald on the footpath, sidewalk. There's supposed to be a scuffle that then occurs between Oswald and Tippit, and then the shooting occurs, and they both head off. Tippett's gone, Oswald's gone down Patton, and this Italian guy's gone across the vacant lot, and I presume down the alley and in that direction. You've then got that police car. The older of the two police officers comes out to the Tippit scene, looks at Tippit, and then goes back. That police car reverses out that driveway that's parked in between the second and third house on 10th Street, into the alley, which is at the back, and then eventually, as I said before, works its way back to the scene after the police had arrived, which is several minutes later. So that's pretty significant sort of reporting. Now, you sort of go, well, that's interesting. Anybody else talk about a police car? Well, the first person that starts talking about other police is Virginia Davis in her Warren Commission testimony. I forget who was interviewing, a Ball or Bellon, somebody. And they said, and what did you do then? Oh, we went outside and did the police come? They were already there. And Joseph McBride touches on this stuff. It's pretty clear. She knows exactly what she's saying. As soon as they went outside, she said the police were already there. And she doesn't say anything about a police car, but if she's coming out of her building, she wouldn't see a police car, which is parked a couple of houses down, reversing out the driveway, backwards south. So that's one indication that you've got other police on the scene. You've then got Mike Brownlow spoke to Sam Ginyard, who's the guy that works in the car yard with Callaway at the back there of the alley. And Mike spoke to him in the early 70s from memory. African-American to African-American. Quite happy to talk to each other. And they did. And he said he saw the second police car come out of the alley. He never said anything officially about that at all. And I think for good reason. But the other one that we've got, which is, I think, very strong, is another corroboration, is Doris Helen, who you probably had heard mention of. Some of the different writers have mentioned her situation, her story. She was living in a short period of time in the 10th Street house, looking across the road to the Tippit scene, and in the Patton Street house, just at the corner of the alley, looking back up and across to the back of the houses where the alley was, with the car reversed. So it doesn't really matter which house she's living in. She can see the driveway. And I have got a document here, which, if you don't mind, if we could, Robbie, if we could just share this particular document. Let me find it. Here it is here. This is from the article I did in Garrison. So just on the right-hand side there, you'll see it says, according to Ladd's sister, this is what Doris Helen told her. So the background story here is Doris Helen's children. Ladd is one of them. The sister, I won't give out her name, was told information from Doris Helen, the mother. And that's what she said. She said, Doris, she was on the second floor. Now, whether it's at the 10th Street or the Patton Street, take your pick. She saw two men on a corner. She was looking out a window and saw Oswald quite clearly. He was running towards between the houses. A police car drove through the driveway. She told the police this, and they told detectives she didn't think they passed it on to anyone else. She said it was like they didn't want Oswald caught. Now, this is in written messages to Ladd. He had conversations with her, but that's what she messaged him. So we're not interpreting her words or her language. The interesting thing with this, Robbie, is that she spoke to another researcher at the time, Dale Myers, who's also written a book on Tippit. He's written some other books. There's some good information in his book, but he doesn't know how to spell conspiracy. He doesn't enter any vocabulary. And he goes the opposite direction whenever he can. And that's his choice, and that's the conclusion he's come to. I think he's wrong in so many cases. But the difficulty I have with some of his material is that, according to Ladd's sister, the lady that has got this information that I've just read out, and you can just see here on the screen, she spoke with Dale Myers as well and told him the same situation, told him the same information. Dale Myers then wrote an article. It's not in there. None of this is in there. So if what she's saying is correct, she told Dale Myers this. Dale Myers has chosen not to put that out there. And it's only through my following back around, because Dale had spoken to Ladd, and then I eventually spoke to Ladd. And it wasn't so much about the house. It was about what she saw, and this is what she saw. So we've got some pretty good corroboration. I'll pull that document down there. We've got some pretty good corroboration of the second police car. The second police car is going to be the backup for when the plan was for Oswald to be shot, and they would have appeared on the scene in an instant and controlled the environment. My bet, if I had to put some money on who is it or where are they from, I think they're local. Unless Murray Jackson has sent a completely foreign out of its district, like from the north, and sent them over to this district, I think it's more likely a car that is in that normal Oak Cliff area, because there's a number of districts around Oak Cliff. Who it was, don't know. Like I said, Brownlow and Pulte have got some quite strong indication that it's Harry Olsen, and that's coming from the police. That's coming from the Finlays and Chambers and a number of these people that have talked about it, detectives. And so I think that second police car had a role. And the minute Oswald was shot Tippit, they didn't come out to see what's happening with their fellow or protect him. They've gone, whoops, that's not supposed to happen. And they probably would have been in a fair bit of shock. They've probably had to have some sort of communication. What do we do now? I think that's where a decision might have been made to put that wallet down. And they've reappeared on the scene. What's his name? McBride, I think, has come up with some pretty good stuff when he's talking to Tippit's father, Edgar. Yeah, he can be old, but he's got his faculties. And that's the thing you've got to do when you're talking to these people is you've got to get an understanding of their clarity, you know, how instant is it? How genuine is it? You do ask things several times in different ways to see whether you're still getting the similar response or the same response. It can be similar in some cases. And I think that's what that second police car is all about. It's basically to provide that support. That officer that's been suggested, William Mental, is a possibility. He's supposed to be very nearby at a minor, bingle car accident or something, and he is called to the scene a little bit later. But there's other possibilities besides him. But I think it would have been an Oak Cliff car and officers, so it's probably somebody working in partnership with Tippit.
I think we might have messaged about this, but about the officer that allegedly stopped at the boarding house and honked and then drove off.
Yeah, yeah. Who that is, I don't know. Well, Helen Roberts, I think, was given a bit of a hard time, but she believes there's two officers. Some people are saying, well, Tippit's car had a coat in the back. Oh, yeah. I think she saw what she saw. She's not studying the scene. She's trying to relay this stuff and all the excitement that comes down later. People talk about, well, was Oswald wearing a jacket? Well, you've got to discount her radio phone call she had with the radio station that afternoon, where she quite clearly says, it's Oswald. She's seen him here for 6 weeks now. Some people think Oswald wasn't even living in the boarding house. Well, I think he was. She's saying it was him, and she spoke to him. He didn't reply, and then he left wearing a short grey coat. That's what she says on the radio, only a few hours after the JFK assassination, because the guy says to her on the radio, "Oh, so when did you see?" I saw him just earlier, and he says, "What, today?" She said, "Yeah, before he came home." Then she explained it. Came in and then got his short grey coat and left. So she says that to me it's more important there's a police car there. Who it was, don't know. Penn Jones had a theory who it was. The important thing to me, though, is that Oswald standing at the bus stop. That's the important thing. He didn't walk out of that rooming house and go to the south to his left. He went to the right, probably about 20, 30 metres. And he's standing at the bus stop. That's where she sees him. Well, he's waiting for a lift. And that explains the time differential of how he's able to get over the 10th reasonably quickly. But it doesn't blow it out to 16. I think they had to make that play because of the timing issue for him to walk. He wasn't walking. I don't think he's walking. No one sees him walking. And you're not going to see him in a car either. But he's got there fairly quickly. As I said, look at the Brownlow and Pulte stuff that they did about Harry Olsen. It's quite convincing.
I want to ask you about Jack Ruby's association with Dallas Police. It's obviously was a matter of the Warren Commission to look at it, but I don't think, their investigation of it that wasn't properly suffice, I would say. There's a lot of interesting connections with Jack Ruby and many Dallas police officers. I think every testimony has concluded that Jack Ruby knew many police officers, but nobody could recall personal names. My favorite is Joe Cody, Detective Cody, because he happened to be ice skating with Jack Ruby a couple of times, and it was when he hurt his ankle. But this was obviously a large thing for the HSCA and the Warren Commission when it came into how Ruby could have gotten into the basement to shoot Oswald. I mean, you can use that as prime evidence as that this existing relationship between Ruby and Dallas police officers were the reason why Dallas police hired Ruby to kill Oswald, to silence him, which I do believe. So, I mean, I was curious what your thoughts were on the whole associations between Jack Ruby and the Dallas police.
Yeah, well, we haven't really touched too much on the Scoggins side of thing, but William Scoggins told his son Calvin, who then told his son, which is Ken Scoggins, who I've done an interview with, and you can see it on YouTube. It's there for all to see. Um, and he's talking about the connection between the police and organised crime. He refers to the guy that William Scoggins refers to the guy that contacted him was a mob associate of Jack Ruby, and the request to be on the scene as a planted witness the next day. This was on the Thursday night he was contacted. That's come from Jack Ruby. Now, Jack Ruby's not organising this for Jack Ruby's sake. Jack Ruby's organising this for the interception, which is the Dallas police. So that's a pretty strong tie in there. If you just had a theory about that, then that's just a theory. But we've got the family saying this is what he told us. You've got the Markham family saying the same thing, but they've got two of their children involved in it. There were some other Markham family brothers and sisters. The other brother wasn't in the game. He was a roofer, but he had ties where he worked with the two husbands of the Davis sisters. So you've got connections all over the place. And as I said, that had a connection to Jack Ruby through the phones. So there's a policeman there. He's dead now. I met him on the Nile. I'm just trying to think of his name. Michael Brownlow did an interview with him. It's on YouTube. I'll think of his name as we go along, I'm sure. And he talked quite clearly about the police would give Jack Ruby a lift to go and do his runs in a police car, to take him to payoff sites. He'd have pockets of cash in envelopes. So if you want to find evidence of the sort of connection with Ruby with police, that's a pretty good place to start. There's a detective who knew a lot of things, and he's not hiding it. Like, he was on YouTube. He explained who he was. He actually said he was in the Texas theater as an undercover at the time, and that's why he and his partner's name didn't end up on the list. And it is quite possible that is who was taken out the back door. Now, you've got the guy from what's the name of that guy who was at the shop a couple of doors down from the Texas theater that went out the alley and sort of witnesses the bloke being brought out the back. I can't think of his name. But he, if you look at his interview, it was done with Jim Mars, he actually says, I don't think they had the guy handcuffed. He said, I couldn't see any handcuffs. And then when Mars asked him what he was wearing, he said, I think wearing a suit. That was the first thing he said, wearing a suit. Oh, okay. So again, some of that's not gelling with the story that's now being evolved, that we've got a second lookalike Oswald taken out the back. He just didn't even say he looked alike. He just said he was similar build. I think that was about as far as he went. So I think we've got to look at some of this stuff and be a bit careful with it. But just getting back to the Jack Ruby, I'll send you the link to that interview that Mike did say you'll have it. You might be able to put that link on your thing. But there's quite a lot of the police Finlay Chambers, and they talked about the people in particular that Ruby would utilise, and I put some of them in the article I wrote. You've got Harry Olsen, you've got Joe Cody, you've got what's his name? They're doing another little run through on his Roscoe White. There's a couple of others. Blackie Harrison from Juvenile Bureau. There's some interesting characters there that Ruby had some connections with. Um, I think they facilitated him into the basement, Ruby. Um, he was stalking Oswald. Again, was he trying to find an excuse not to do it? Did he position himself in the back of that auditorium where Oswald's there and he's way up the back? Well, was he trying to make it sound like he just couldn't get close to him, couldn't get close to him? Well, they made sure he could. He had no way to get out of that. They controlled him all the way.
There's an interesting statement by, I think his name's Officer Clarity. He was one of the people that he was supposed to go there for the transfer of Oswald. He ended up going there like I think an hour before it was going to happen. And he was in the basement, and when Jack Ruby shot Oswald, he didn't even know who shot Oswald at first because everyone just jumped on top of Ruby. Even Jim Lavelle, I think, states that he didn't know it was Jack, even though he's quoted as saying, "Jack, you son of a bitch." Um, he just apparently in his testimony, he's like, I didn't know who it was at the time. But if you look through like their Dallas Police, the portal Texas history, when you're looking through their statements, Detective Clarity was on the fifth floor with Ruby when they had to strip search him and everything. And he asked Jack, he said, why'd you do it? And Jack stated, because you guys couldn't.
Yeah,
And it was like, I mean, you could take that whichever way you want, but I don't know. For me, it was just interesting because like there's these little details you're digging out of people's testimonies. And a lot of the Dallas police, like they've all said they didn't know how Jack Ruby got in the basement, but he was there all weekend. He obviously was using his Dallas police connections to be able to be involved in there. He's dressing up as press, but everyone knew him. You know, everyone quoted saying, "Yeah, there's Jack Ruby over there." He had a gun on him
yeah,
all
yeah,
weekend too. He could have took a shot at any moment, but he decides at the transfer that he was going to do it. He had any clear time at any of those times that Oswald was brought up in front of the press to take a shot. But there's one thing we haven't mentioned, and you do cover. We haven't talked about Aquila Clemens.
yeah, yeah. Before you do, there's something you mentioned there about Ruby, and I thought I'll just pull this document up. You mentioned the HSCA, so we'll just have a quick look at.
Look, I know their conclusions weren't right for a lot of people, but I would recommend their work over the Warren Commission. I mean, it's only a matter of like that they believed in what the mafia did it, and that's only because I mean, Blakey's whole fucking background was organized crime. Did you not expect him to look where everywhere that would be like an organized crime rock?
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. They did some good work. They also left a lot of confusion and a lot of stones unturned, and I think they were influenced. Just have a read of this. It's from the HSCA attorney Andy Purdy, 1988 TV special. You can look at this on YouTube. I've got the link just down below here. That's the actual link that people can find it on if they want to look at that particular link. But look what he says. This is Andy Purdy says it's possible that Oswald, when confronted with Officer Tippit, came to realise that maybe he was about to be killed, to be silenced, and defended himself and killed Tippit. It may be that Jack Ruby and others were involved in a conspiracy to silence Oswald. It may be that Officer Tippit by himself or with others was involved in a conspiracy to silence Oswald also. And that when the attempt to kill Oswald by Officer Tippit failed, then Jack Ruby was a fallback. I just looked at that when I first came across this some years ago, and so I thought, how does someone on the HSCA come up with that? He hasn't just woken up one morning and gone, I know, and then come up with this. He's come up with that for a reason. He's got something, he's heard something. There's been some discussion around this very issue, but nothing's come out in the HSCA paperwork. And there he is, 10 years after the HSCA, saying that in a radio interview. And it's got Tippit, Oswald, Ruby, all know each other. And Ruby's had to do the job that Tippit was supposed to do. It's pretty interesting. Aquila Clemens, you want to have a quick chat about her?
Yeah. Have you ever heard the name Henry Gonzalez, though?
Henry Gonzalez was in the motorcade, the
Yeah, he was
congressman.
the fourth car. He took pictures at Parkland Hospital, and he ended up actually introducing the legislature to get an intelligence committee or get a committee together to investigate, which later became the HSCA, which he ended up chairing. Now, he did have some conflicts with Richard Sprague, which I believe Richard Sprague would have did a better job than any of the original stuff with the HSCA, Blakey, or anybody in charge. But he states something in a letter to somebody. He did have his cameras, like after he took photos at Parkland and everything, he took photos of Kennedy under a sheet and everything. I never really heard of this guy before, but he went to Washington after the trip. Then 2 weeks later, he went to San Antonio and visited one of his offices. And in his letter, he states specifically that he put his cameras that he brought to Dallas in his car, locked it. He remembers locking it. He came back out, his car was unlocked. Now, there was no sign of a break-in, but his cameras were gone. And he ended up reporting it to the police. He ended up getting them back later, but the film was gone. So, I mean, it was suspicious for him, but he openly stated that he believes that there has been no official investigation into the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And he thinks that all records should be available to the public, which lone nutters and conspiracy people do agree. So for me, it's like a lot of people think that the HSCA was like this, oh, government, kind of like, oh, second investigation, but overall it had an ending strategy. That can be true, but there was a lot of people that thought that that whole committee was garbage as well. So there has been people that have tried to get to some truth. Now you can consider them part of the cover up, but I do believe that like when we have these and these just interesting tidbits come out, you really have to examine like when we talk about an overall grand conspiracy and what's just overall people that cared about their job, cared about their families, that they didn't want to risk putting their career on the line. There's a lot of influencing factors here. So when we talk about the JFK assassination, it's easier to talk about those things and separate them from the whole taboo of conspiracy.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing when you look at the conspiracy. I don't think I'd heard about Gonzalez and the camera. Actually, that's new. I'll have to follow up on that. And
I got a clip on my YouTube about it.
okay, I'll have a look at that. But yeah, um, I think when you look at the whole issue of conspiracy in the HSCA, I mean, I haven't studied all their material, and um, they came to a different finding. Probable conspiracy. That was pretty strong. It was based on not just the acoustic recording, but other material. I think there's some strength with that. I think some of the work that was done around Oswald and the Mexico City and all that stuff was pretty good. Was pretty good. But yeah, but look, did you want to mention
Akilla Clemens,
Aquila?
yeah.
There's a YouTube thing with Aquila Clemens, and Mark Lane did an interview with her, and that's interesting. There's also been a number of other people that have done some interviews. Um, uh, Mike Brownlow did actually talk to her again. African American was able to talk to another African American, and Mike had a couple of different views about her stuff as to how close she was. Um, that's probably my only question too, as to how close she was. When she's talking to Shirley Martin, where Shirley Martin with her children actually went around and interviewed and whatever. Well, Shirley's daughter's got a tape recorder hidden, and then transcribed it off the tape. Play, record, stop, rewind, all this sort of stuff. And you can see the transcript. I don't know if you've seen it, but I can send it to you if you haven't seen it. And she does say some interesting things, and she quite clearly is talking about the second man going across the vacant lot. And there we've got Thomas Buchanan saying that back in 1964 about a man going across the man. He didn't talk about two across the vacant lot. When Aquila Clemens gets to the Mark Lane discussion, again, when somebody is giving a description of something, if I put my hand up and go over here to the right, I'm pointing in my right-hand direction. Aquila does that a couple of times. And she's kind of, my interpretation, she's sitting in a chair as if she's leans over to her right-hand side. And she's sort of saying the man went down and she's using a left hand down pattern. And then she goes the other one and she's going out. She's taking it in that sort of southwesterly sort of direction. So she's going the vacant lot. And she actually says, so one down pattern, she actually says, you can't quite hear the word, but you can hear pattern. And then across this way, she says. But when she's talking to Shirley Martin, she's saying, she actually says the word vacant lot. That's my only question with Aquila is how close was she? Part of that would depend on how slow Oswald and this other guy, Italian man, how slow did they leave the scene, or how quickly did they leave the scene? According to the Markham, Helen Markham, it wasn't that fast. The other thing I just touch on there, just getting off Aquila for a second. I'm not sure if I did mention with the Scoggins family that William Scoggins said he saw two men. So I'm not sure if I did mention that before, that he was a planted witness, but he did see two men. And he talks about the two men separating. And I've got an article coming out in Garrison soon, which goes into a lot more detail about this. It's not clear what direction William Scoggins is saying. They just separated. But if you look at what Helen Markham is saying, she's talking down Patton, and the other guy across the vacant lot, Aquila Clemens, is saying the same thing. Like I said, Aquila, I'm just not sure how far out she got in, like how quickly she got out to the street, because she's at I think it's the Smotherby's or whatever house where she's doing the housekeeping. And from memory, I think it's 3 houses down on the northeast of 10th Street. So she could come out and get fairly quickly. There's some, is she on the porch, which some people believe she was, or was she out the back? I think she was on the porch. She says as much to the Martins. I think it's to the Martins. So the question is how good a view, but she even says that, she thought that the person was coming at her. That's what she says to Shirley Martin. So I think it's credible. And she's talking about two people, and that's what Helen Markham's talking about. And that's what other people are talking about. Miss Helen in that arc I just showed you, two men on the corner. So there's two people there. That's not what come out in the official Warren Commission. You've got the Markham, Helen Markham, and you've also got Scoggins. They've been then controlled as to what they're saying. In the article, I've got quite a few examples of where Helen was. In this article coming up with Scoggins, there's a couple of things that I touch on there. We all know Scoggins is crouched at the cab. Was he? If you have a look at his early FBI, Secret Service, or I don't know, Dallas Police, a couple of them actually, he's not crouched at the car. He went across Patton. And in one of them, he says he came back after the guy was already heading down Patton. Now, he would have been told, well, that's not the go. So you're too far away from the suspect to identify him. So we've got you back at the car. That may be the case. In his testimony, he just says that the car stopped and then the man went over to the car and then he heard gunshot. That's about all he says. If you look at his statements, he says the officer got out of the car, called the man or said something to the man, and the man stopped. That's a very different scenario from what he testifies to. So I think the people were controlled as to what they say. And it's very interesting that Scoggins says that he went back to the cab company after the scene, didn't go to the police station until the next day to do the lineup. That part's correct. He didn't go to do the lineup till the next day. But if you look at his testimony, go right to the end, he thinks the thing's over. And the guy sort of says, one last question. Helen Markham, did you see her there? They keep asking all these people, did they see Helen Markham? What's that got to do with the price of rice? But anyway, they all did this. They asked the Davis girls, strange questioning. But he says, no, I didn't see her till we came back. And what he explained was when he took off with Callaway and they've driven around a couple of blocks, then they got intercepted out there by some other police and they explained what they were doing and they were told to go back to the scene. So they did. Callaway then handed the gun over. This is Tippit's gun. This is cowboys and Indian stuff. This is, running around with Tippit's gun looking for Oswald. But anyway, he then says something along the lines that I then left my cab sitting there and went with the officers in their car and left the scene. He's gone with the police. He doesn't say that early on. He says he went to the cab company. So I think they've had to pull these people in when they realise they've got a planted scene that didn't go down too well. I've got a question mark about Jim Lavell's role with all of this as to exactly what's going on there. He seems to have had a strange goings on with when it comes to Benavides' testimony. Did he or didn't he go down and make an affidavit? He writes a report that says Benavides made an affidavit that night. Where is it? Hasn't appeared. But interestingly, when you talk to the Markham family, they're on record. There's an interview where one of the Markham family, and it's Helen's son-in-law, says that Helen Markham never came back to the next morning from the police station. When this guy heard the police shooting was happened at an Oak Cliff, he immediately thought, "What's James Markham doing? What's going on over there? This is his nephew." And he's sorry, not nephew, it's his brother-in-law. So he's ringing up, looking for Helen Markham at the house, at her apartment on 9th Street, can't find her. What does he ring now? He rings her work, can't find her. What does he ring now? Police station. They say, yeah, she's here. And he said she didn't come back to the next morning. She came back in a coat. She didn't have the uniform white dress thing that she was wearing, that white outfit. She didn't have a scarf. She didn't have shoes. And he said they even had her, what do you call it, pantyhose, get up, white pantyhose in the first time. That's strange. So were they keeping that for blood splatter? I've got no idea. But anyway, that's what they're saying. So it may well be that, and Laverne did say that Helen Markham and the other members of the gang were called in over the next few days, that night and over the next few days, because they realised they had some goings on with this whole thing. So that's sort of, yeah, a bit of a quick sort of summary of what I was able to glean from talking to the families. You asked about what it was like talking with them. I found it really interesting. Frustrating because I'm in Australia, so we've got a big time difference. You know, it's 9:30 here at night time, and for you it's about 7:30 in the morning. So when you're dealing with that all the time, there was gaps, and we, would have to have another phone call and then get back on track, emails and staying in touch that way. But you just got to be patient. I found Laverne and the other people I spoke to all very genuine. You can only look at that interview with Ken Scoggins, very genuine guy, honest guy. This is what I understand. The family's kept this stuff very tight for good reason. He just sort of a bit disappointed he wasn't able to talk to William about it because he didn't find out about this till well after William had died. He actually said he was confused. He thought he didn't know much about it. He thought that that William Scoggins had driven Oswald from Dealey Plaza area over to Oak Cliff. He didn't realise he was at the Tippit scene. So these people, some of them, they haven't studied this thing. They've just basically reiterated what they know. But Laverne spent a fair bit of time understanding what went down. She was very close to it. Her husband's there in the gang and was involved in setting up Oswald, and Oswald was connected to that gang in some way. I mentioned in the article that they had played cards with them. They had been to the Scoggins, which is that little cafe, whatever you call it, drugstore, pharmacy, or whatever, down near Crawford, just near the Texaco. That's where Helen works sometimes. So, yeah, this is what they were able to impart. And, they had no qualms in explaining it. So I found it all very interesting, the exercise. When I was able to get some corroboration from the different material that I've put in that report, it doesn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm not saying that at all. But families have a way of having things that are passed on down the line, and there's truth in that.
I'm going to ask you one last question here, but writing for the garrison journals, I mean, does that bring you hope that there's still an interest in the public? Are you coming across newer generations like myself or younger generations that are more interested in the assassination? I thought I mean, there's a lot of documents that still need to be released. I think everybody's just waiting for those and hoping it happens in their lifetime. But everyone that I've talked to or everyone that I've looked at and I've tried to spark up interest in younger generations, I'm curious if you're writing for the garrison journals and other things as well too, if you've come across more of an interest in maybe newer generations or just a public interest in general to actually learn the more specific facts and kind of advanced research besides that, I never believed Oswald took those shots.
Yeah. Look, I had no intention of either writing a book or even doing an article, and it was just after a period of time when I gathered this, I thought, well, I've got to put this down. So I'm trying to make a record of it. STP Patrick ST Patrick, I should say, at the Garrison Journal, Midnight Rider, some quality stuff in there, and he was quite happy to publish it. For me, that was my way of putting it on record. I was, I'd reviewed it quite a lot of times to make sure that I was comfortable that I wasn't overreaching. I wasn't, interpreting something slightly, too far. I wasn't really interpreting much at all. I was trying to say, this is what they've said. And I think it could be in this, it's likely this, it's possible this. But the information is there. People can interpret it how they wish. If they don't think the way I've interpreted it is correct, they can come up with their own interpretation. You can't get away from second police car, planted witnesses, and it's at a predetermined location because Tippit is out of his view, he's out of his area. It's not a coincidence that he's just stumbled across Oswald as per the Warren Commission by chance. It's a planned interception.
And Gavin, where can people find any of your links?
Look, I've only just on Facebook, Gavan McMahon. If people want to contact me there, it's fine. I've got an email, GMC, that's Gavan McMahon, GMC, Golf Mike Charlie, at Froggy, Foxtrot Romeo, Oscar Golf Golf Yankee.com.au. Down under.
I'll make sure I link your links in the description. Any other links I can find, like Garrison articles or anything that people can give a reference to, be able to look at some of your work. I'll make sure I include in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, Gavin. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.